we're going to have a conversation, and Ed's going to lead that by showing some of his work in the area of data visualization. I'll interrupt you from time to time, and then in the time left over, we'll talk about some of the issues that are facing you in your field right now.
Cool. Good morning. What I wanted to talk about today is several strategies, actually methodologies or logics, that have been enabling design to enter into a world of 7 billion people rather than into a world of 1 billion people. And the first, let's see if this works, which would be spectacular. Maybe? Okay, I have to get up. So I wanted to talk about data visualization and interface design and storytelling because I think that these are three really critically interesting and very different tools that are available and of great interest to people. The data visualization for me is the idea of constructing a very dense interface between people and And so this first image that I wanted to show, I think, talks about it really beautifully. This is an illustration that was done in 1840 by three German designer and biologists, botanists, who wanted to put together a map of some sort. I guess they would think of it as a map of where all the plants, both on land and in the water, are. And they wanted to lay over that idea about all the plants, how high they were, and what the ecosystem that they existed in. So I blew it up a little bit so you could see it. So the interesting thing to me about this, and why I mention this first, because it's a really old idea, an old object, is that when they were composing it, I imagine, obviously, that they were thinking about how could we do something where someone could use one document and learn about a plant, its name, and about its habitat, and about its elevation. And they track lines in the bottom of the drawing having to do with the depth of the plant as it exists in the ocean. So the thing that interests me, and the thing that interests me about all work like this, is what does this depict about the audience that's going to use it? Not so much about the people who create it, but what does it depict really about the audience that uses it? And I think that so much about our design efforts in contemporary life have to do with the fact that there will be 7 billion people on Earth simultaneously by the end of this year, with right now about 230,000 more people on Earth every day. So that change is profoundly dramatic, because what it does is it places the idea of networks and intersection as the means by which to communicate, rather than through static objects and through the enhancement of static physical designs, and through the idea of information as having a very small audience like this one had, which was basically botanists. So this was made very beautifully and made so that it had a kind of iconic look to it, so that when you think about that image, when you think about that image, it's a very haunting thing that you will remember, and then obviously all the intricacies for it, but its use in terms of a wide audience was very limited, and probably there was a very small audience for it when it was thought about. The work that we are making and doing right now, with any luck, this will animate. Oh, maybe I have to go one more. So look at this. This is GPS tracking of taxi cabs in New York City. So this is an amazing data visualization. It's amazing because it has an audience that isn't educated within the framework of the information that's being presented, except that people like to get cabs. And so having this cab spotting, taxi spotting tool in your hand means that you can really actually predict whether or not you have any likelihood of getting a cab at a certain moment. So data visualization that isn't based on a very finite information set and use. In other words, the intention of the mapping is beyond something specific and where you're trying to advance a specific object, a specific idea. But what you're really trying to do is enhance the collective collaborative experience of the people using it. So data visualization has an aspiration now and an importance now because in a way what it speaks to is the aspiration of having the contribution to the cultural understanding of the world be collaborative and compositional, and for the nervous systems that are hooked to the edge of this capability, all activating and contributing simultaneously. So this is another way of looking at data in a contemporary way. This is a Twitter mapping of people watching and talking about the Steelers-Cardinals game. So another way of thinking about things, probably less extensive in terms of the number of people who will be interested, but as a methodology, as a meta-strategy about what the kinds of information we should be expecting, this is really important. Because the kind of information we should be expecting in front of us is dynamic rather than static, that it's compositional based on people doing things rather than the still analytic of people having done things. And so that it really is really interesting to kind of stress this idea of the kinds of information and patterning that we're looking at isn't static anymore because everyone's collaborating to compose what we're seeing and interpreting it. So that becomes really interesting. This is the Reuters sign on 43rd and Broadway, and it had on it actually, right now it's not working, a heat map. And it was the thing that was interesting about the heat map was that it was a map of the heat of the news at any given moment in time. So you think about that and you think, okay, well, what does that mean? It meant to us in the way we composed it on its first round that it was the heat of a day was how focused the event was that happened and how broad was the amount of people reporting on it around the world. So it was that an event where most of the news organizations and most of the websites and most of the reporting going on in the world was about one object or one thing happening. So the idea of having measurement devices which are enabling us to see patterns that are intuitive to some, accessible to some, or interesting to some, really changes when you begin to have a pattern that says there's something that you should be thinking about that works much faster than that. This is a thing that we just put in Times Square, which allows people in Times Square to upload a picture of themselves, and the one that gets the most attention from the people who vote on it becomes the center picture in the idea. What this does is shows a completely different sense about what we should be looking at based on a collaborative composition of what's interesting rather than an individual push on a subject. So the idea of collaborative composition, the idea of information being dynamic rather than static, of it being intentional for a whole series of overlays in an experience is really important. The second piece that's really interesting is the issue about the interface, the ability to access information in such an environment and be able to compose it really well. This is I hope this, oops, please operate. So this is Microsoft's thing that actually does subset analysis of complete data fields. So it does it really rapidly and really quickly, depending on what you say you're interested in, and goes from the overall to the specific very rapidly. It's quite a beautiful interface. So the idea that we have to actually select for someone in advance is much less interesting than making a dynamic field which is as encyclopedic and accessible as possible and making subsets and focus on it possible really easily. This is a tool that allowed in Best Buy, in the company, for everyone in the company to find out who was shopping everywhere in all their stores, what they were shopping about, and also it was a customer-facing tool where the customers could see the same set of information. This is another tool that we did for Best Buy, which is this is a heat map showing people shopping in a store. It's an infrared camera, or cameras above in the ceiling, seeing where people go, how long they stay at a place, how many people repeat on the same object. Well, this is really interesting. It's interesting as a sort of a meta view for a manager, but we took a next step and put the heat map onto the physical world so that you could actually translate that into what you put where, when, and how to evaluate it. So again, one of the things that's really critically important in the design of these tools is understanding how heuristic and how variable the audience can be in order to understand something. And this is an interface about for seeing what data looks like about you in a large company, and with your ability to see what level of penetration you've made into Best Buy and other stores. So the third part that I wanted to bring up is the idea of storytelling. We're in an environment where the idea of a single narrative about our culture or about an event, about a place, about ourselves is impossible. No one really wants to accept that anymore. So the idea really is that we need to have multiple channel, multiple voice stories, which weave together what is, in a sense, the thing. And so we're just doing this project, which is opening in New Bern, North Carolina in October, well, later this month, which is that the entire museum of Tryon Palace exists on smartphones. And so, but the thing that we like about it, we're really excited about it, is the fact that the narrative that's in it has 8 voices, so that you can look at what you're seeing from the perspective of an African American, from the perspective of a child, from the perspective of one of the leaders in the community. So there isn't a preferred narrative, there's a chosen narrative. And so the idea is that you're seeing this environment composed with conflicting and collaborating tools. And this is the Shanghai Pavilion that was mentioned. The reason I'm showing this is that this is as far as we've gotten in an experiment to do something where the voices of the composition are also the voices of the audience, and that the kind of immersive documentary of the story is dependent on the people who are in it. So here we designed this pavilion with the imagery coming from people in Shanghai uploading their favorite images about Shanghai, and then making the content of the experience based on their pictures. And then the entire LED of this environment is controlled by the clapping of hands and waving arms in the theater experience down below. So the experience, and here you're walking through this immersive documentary, and your gestures changed the color of the room, the look of these weeds, and in the theater, people are clapping and making the environment transform, but also making the building itself transform. So then you witness that the storyline of the experience, which has many, many different aspects, is that it's a collaborative composition that makes for a really contemporary experience.
Ed,
So
we have
I'll
just
stop
a few
there.
more minutes to
Yeah.
talk. So
So
maybe.
I don't need to talk anymore.
It's such amazing work, and when I look at what you're doing, the immediate question that comes to my mind is, what do we as designers need to know in order to do this kind of work? And I imagine you have a team of people putting this together. Mm-hmm. Where do these people come from, and what kind of skills do they bring to create this type of collaborative storytelling of the future?
But I would say that the critical part of your question is there is no way to do this kind of work unless you do it in a team. Mm-hmm. That the idea of being an individual designer making things is impossible. No one's smart enough, and no one has the background and training. In our office, I would say the thing that is consistent is that everyone who works there has changed fields. I would say that that's the big idea, which is that they've got, and because that's why I think that's important, is because when people master something, that has to do with themselves, and when they master something else, it means that they're having another conversation in the world. And it seems to me that is really important in terms of people's capability. The actual trained capability, you could say that they're trained in mathematics, or they're trained in Flash, or so it's a combination of tools and disciplines and logics that I think are important. I think that the big issue really is understanding the design process as emerging from the user in rather than from the tool out. In other words, that we think about this and also think about the audience as that we're making both information and experience, which happens for the audience, but it also happens as a meta program about what's possible. So every time you make a great data visualization or a great interface, you set the standard for yet the next great interface. So I think that that's really part of the process now.
Right. When I look at data visualization, I sort of see two extremes. And at one end, it's incredibly clear, and it tells me a story. And on the other end, I find it overwhelming and impossible to grasp. How do you control that in a project? How do you create a visualization that's actually meaningful to people and not simply a kind of sensory overload?
What I think the thing you have to accept is that it's going to be interesting for somebody rather than necessarily interesting for everybody. I think we have this aspiration that an audience is a 17-year-old guy or a 45-year-old woman. I think that that's interesting as an aspect of a composition. But I think if you're really doing things that have to do with thousands and Shanghai, the Expo at Shanghai has had, I think, 70 million people visit it already. Not our pavilion, but which has had several million people visit it. But so the idea is, do you have a particular audience? You can't. You need to compose things where there is in a much more Shakespearean way, in which there are dirty jokes. There's a very serious historical narrative. There's a very interesting human narrative. There's great language. There's good rhythm. All those things have to be part of the data visualization. So you might be overwhelmed if you try to get every aspect of it, but you probably can grasp a few things that are important.
Terrific. Do you have any advice for people working in this field? The issue that always upsets me in museum context is how often things don't work.
Yeah.
How do you keep stuff from breaking with 1 million people in your audience? And that'll be our last question there.
Wow. Good maintenance. I think that the advice about being a designer now is to be a great team member, to practice being really great at a team as part of a team. I think that's in other words, having trained yourself well enough to have skills that are valuable to other people in the world, but also to make sure that you know how to collaborate and co-create things with other people and other design groups and other organizations. Because I think if you can't do that, the work that you produce can't really have a big effect.
And then the work itself is a collaboration with the public, too,
exactly.
Which is terrific.
Right. So the things that we like to do, we think that they start when they're being used rather than they finish when they're starting to be used.
That's terrific. Thank you so much.
Sure.